Samantha Nolan stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the boxes that held the remnants of her old life. Just a year ago, everything had seemed perfect: a good job, a loving husband, and two beautiful children. She had walked away from her career to support her husband, Marcus, in his rise to success, believing it was best for their family. But now, the life she had sacrificed so much for had crumbled in the most painful way imaginable. It had been a normal evening. She had left the kids with a sitter and decided to surprise Marcus by bringing him dinner at his office. When she arrived, she found his office door slightly ajar. What she saw inside shattered her world. Marcus tangled with her best friend, Kelly, the woman she had trusted with every secret. Her breath had caught in her throat, but the hurt, the betrayal, it was like an avalanche. She fled, running from the building and calling her sister as she drove aimlessly through the streets. That night, Samantha packed her things and took her children, leaving the home they had built for a life that suddenly felt foreign. She filed for divorce immediately. Marcus, of course, had tried to explain it away, saying it was just a mistake, but Samantha wasn't interested in his excuses. She couldn't forget the look on his face as he stumbled to cover himself, the guilt that flashed in his eyes. It wasn't the first time, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. She wouldn't be the woman who stayed, the woman who put herself second for the sake of an illusion. But with the divorce came challenges Samantha had never imagined. Marcus controlled their finances, and his lawyers ensured she left with little more than her dignity and the custody of their children. Without savings, she found herself relying on friends and bouncing from one couch to the next with her kids in tow. Her sister, Laura, had been a lifeline during that time. "You'll get through this, Sam," Laura would remind her whenever Samantha's energy flagged. But there were days when it felt like a lie. Now, a year later, she had finally managed to scrape together enough to rent a small, two-bedroom apartment in a new city. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Her children, Emma and Jacob, were adjusting, though the transition was hard on them. Their once joyful spirits were dimmed by the upheaval, and Samantha worked tirelessly to bring back their smiles. Standing there, surrounded by boxes that symbolized all her worldly possessions, Samantha resolved that this would be the beginning of a new life. She would no longer live in the shadow of Marcus's betrayal. For so long, she had allowed herself to disappear behind the role of the supportive wife, convincing herself that she was doing what was best for the family. Now, it was time to reclaim herself. She needed a job, a real one this time, to support her family and rebuild the independence she had lost. With her background in marketing, Samantha applied for positions relentlessly, facing rejection after rejection. "It's been too long since you've worked full-time," they'd say. Or, "Your experience doesn't quite fit our needs." But giving up was not an option. A month later, she landed an interview with a small startup that specialized in digital advertising. It wasn't the senior-level position she had once held, but it was a foot in the door, and that was enough for her. The company's office was located in a modern glass building downtown, a far cry from the corporate behemoths she had once worked for, but there was something about its energy that she liked. She arrived at the interview with her chin held high, knowing that she had to prove herself all over again. And she did. She secured the job, a modest but steady income, and with it a chance at stability. But Samantha's story was only beginning. What she didn't know yet was how much her life was about to change. Soon, there would be an unexpected opportunity that would lead her far from the world she had known, to a place where new love, new success, and a life she truly deserved would be waiting. And Marcus? He wouldn't fare as well. His success had come at the cost of everything that mattered. But that part of the story was still on the horizon, waiting for Samantha to reclaim everything she had lost, and more. For now, she focused on her children, her work, and finding strength within herself. The fire in her heart, once dimmed by betrayal, had begun to flicker again, brighter with each passing day. Months had passed since Samantha had begun her job at the startup, and life was beginning to feel somewhat stable again. Her days were filled with meetings, project deadlines, and balancing her time with Emma and Jacob. She was working harder than she ever had, but there was a quiet pride in her newfound independence. Every paycheck was a small victory, a reminder that she could stand on her own without Marcus. But nights were harder. Once the kids were asleep and the apartment quiet, the weight of what she had lost would creep in. The house, the dreams, the trust. Samantha lay in bed most nights, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the betrayal over and over. No matter how far she moved forward, there was always that lingering question. How had she been so blind? How had she missed the signs? Then one evening, as she was tucking Emma into bed, her daughter asked, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy come to see us anymore?" Samantha's heart clenched. Marcus had moved to a different city for work, or so he said. In truth, he had stopped making much effort to see the kids. His priorities were elsewhere, probably with Kelly. "Daddy's busy with work right now, sweetheart," Samantha said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "But I'm here. Always." Emma nodded, but her eyes held the same sadness Samantha had been trying so hard to erase. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "I love you." As she closed the door, a wave of guilt washed over her. She had sacrificed so much for Marcus, and in return, her children were paying the price too. Back in her own room, Samantha reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over Marcus's number. It had been weeks since they'd spoken, but something in her snapped. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, not when their children were hurting. "Marcus, we need to talk," she typed and hit send before she could change her mind. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Can't talk now. Busy." "What's this about?" The familiar frustration bubbled up. He always had an excuse, always dodged any real responsibility. Her fingers flew over the screen. "Emma's been asking why you haven't come to see her. You need to call her, Marcus. She deserves better than this." He didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next day. And Samantha realized, with painful clarity, that Marcus wasn't coming back. Not for her. Not for their children. The man she had once believed in was gone, lost in his selfishness in pursuit of something she no longer recognized. It was during this time that Samantha's life took another unexpected turn. One morning, her boss, Daniel, called her into his office. His expression was serious, and Samantha's stomach tightened. Had she done something wrong? Was she about to lose the one thing that was keeping her afloat? "Samantha, you've been doing some incredible work these past few months," Daniel began, and the tension in her chest eased slightly. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." She nodded, unsure of where this was heading. "You know, we've been trying to expand our presence overseas, right? Especially in Europe. Well, there's a project that's come up in Madrid. It's big, and we need someone to spearhead it. I want you to lead it." Samantha blinked, stunned. "Madrid?" The idea of moving her life and her children's to a new country seemed impossible. "Madrid?" She finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled. "Yes, it would be a huge opportunity for the company, and for you. I know it's a lot to consider, especially with your family. But we'd support you in the move. Think about it." For the rest of the day, Samantha was in a daze. Moving to Madrid? It seemed absurd, like a dream she had never dared to consider. She had just started to get her life together here. The kids were finally settling into their routines, and she had a job that, while challenging, made her feel alive again. But Madrid, wasn't that a whole new start? A place where she could truly leave the past behind? That night, as she sat at the dinner table with Emma and Jacob, she studied their faces. They were stronger than she gave them credit for. Emma, with her soft curiosity, and Jacob, always resilient, despite everything they had gone through. Maybe a new beginning wouldn't just be good for her, but for them too. "Kids," Samantha said cautiously, trying to gauge their reaction. "How would you feel about living in a new place? Maybe even a new country?" Jacob's eyes lit up. Like a new adventure, he asked, his voice full of excitement. Samantha smiled, though her heart was pounding. Yes, like a new adventure. Somewhere far away. What do you think? Emma was more hesitant. But what about our friends? And what if Daddy wants to come visit? Samantha swallowed, not wanting to crush her daughter's hope. We'd still keep in touch with everyone. And Daddy can always visit us, no matter where we are. Emma nodded slowly, her tiny brow furrowed in thought. Okay, I guess it could be fun. It was the only approval Samantha needed. By the end of the week, she had called Daniel back and accepted the offer. The move to Madrid was a whirlwind. The company handled most of the logistics, but it was Samantha's determination that made it all happen. She sold what little they had in the U.S., packed up the rest, and said goodbye to the life she had known. It wasn't easy. There were tears, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt, but there was also a strange excitement simmering beneath it all. This was a chance to redefine her life, to build something completely new from the ground up. Madrid was everything she hoped it would be. The city buzzed with life, with a rich history and vibrant energy that invigorated her in ways she hadn't felt in years. The children adapted quickly, soaking up the language and culture, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Samantha felt like they were thriving. But perhaps the most unexpected development was when she met Gabriel. He was the project director for one of the company's partners, a tall, kind-hearted man with an easy smile and warm, hazel eyes. They had been working together for weeks, and while their conversations were always professional, there was a spark between them that Samantha couldn't deny. It was in the way he looked at her, like he saw the woman she was becoming, the strong, independent woman who had survived the worst and come out stronger. It scared her at first, the idea of opening her heart again after what Marcus had done. But something about Gabriel was different. He didn't rush her, didn't expect anything. He just was a constant presence, a steady hand in the chaos of her new life. And slowly, as the days turned into weeks, Samantha began to realize that maybe, just maybe, this was her second chance, not just at life, but at love. But fate had other plans. Just as things were beginning to fall into place, a shadow from her past returned, Marcus. This time, though, Samantha wasn't the same woman he had left behind. This time, she was ready. Samantha's life in Madrid had become a delicate balance of excitement and uncertainty. She loved the city's energy, the rhythm of the streets, and the warmth of the people. The kids were flourishing, adjusting to their new school and friends, their laughter filling the small but cozy apartment they now called home. And work was going better than she could have imagined. The project she was leading was a success. And for the first time in years, Samantha felt confident in her abilities again. But then there was Gabriel. He had been a calm presence, someone who made her feel seen in a way Marcus never had. Yet every time she caught herself smiling a little too easily when he was around or lingering in a conversation longer than necessary, fear crept in. Was she ready to open her heart again? To trust another man after the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her? One evening, as she stood on the small balcony overlooking the city, Gabriel's text lit up her phone screen. Dinner tomorrow? Just us. Her heart raced as she stared at the message. She had been avoiding the shift from casual to something more intimate, but she couldn't keep dancing around the truth. There was something between them. But did she have room for it? Before she could respond, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the kids were staying over at a friend's house. She crossed the room, and as she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Marcus! He stood there, looking far too comfortable in his suit, a smirk playing on his lips. Surprised to see me? For a moment, Samantha was frozen. She hadn't seen him in over a year, not since the divorce had finalized and she had left everything behind. And now, standing in her new world, he felt like a ghost from a past life, one she had worked so hard to forget. What are you doing here, Marcus? Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart pounded. He shrugged as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I had business in Europe and figured it was time I checked in on you and the kids. After all, I am still their father. His eyes flicked over the apartment, and Samantha could see the judgment in his gaze. She crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. Checked in on us? You haven't called them in months, Marcus. What do you want? He chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. Still the same? Aren't you, Sam? Always ready for a fight. His expression darkened, and he lowered his voice. I didn't come here for a fight. I came to see my children. Samantha felt her anger rise. The audacity of this man, showing up out of the blue as if he hadn't abandoned them when they needed him most. They're not here. And even if they were, I wouldn't let you waltz in and disrupt their lives just because you suddenly feel guilty. His smirk faded, and a coldness entered his eyes. Guilty? I don't feel guilty, Sam. I moved on. You should have too. Her jaw clenched. The old Samantha might have crumbled at his words, might have questioned whether she had been the problem all along. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had built something new, something strong, and she wasn't going to let him tear it down. I have moved on, Marcus. You don't get to show up and pretend like you still have a place in our lives. You chose Kelly. You chose yourself over us. The kids are doing just fine without you, and so am I. He laughed bitterly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Fine? You're playing house in this little apartment, working a job that's beneath you, and you think you're fine? Samantha's fists clenched at her sides, but she didn't rise to his bait. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she met his gaze, steady and unflinching. This is my life now, Marcus. I'm building something real. You wouldn't understand that, because you only ever cared about appearances. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their history pressing down on them. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice low and filled with something darker than before. You think you've won, don't you? That you're better off without me. But you'll see, Sam. This life you're so proud of, it's fragile. One wrong move, and it'll fall apart. The venom in his words stung, but Samantha didn't waver. She had spent too many nights doubting herself, too many days wondering if she had made the right decisions. But she knew now, with more certainty than ever, that her life was better without Marcus in it. Leave, she said, her voice steady. You're not welcome here. For a moment, Marcus looked like he might say something else, but instead he turned and walked away. Samantha stood in the doorway, watching him disappear down the hall, the echo of his footsteps fading into the night. She closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. Her heart was still racing, but not with fear or doubt. No, this time it was with the adrenaline of realizing just how far she had come. Marcus had no power over her anymore. He was a remnant of a life she had outgrown. The next morning, Samantha sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee as sunlight streamed through the windows. Her phone buzzed again with a message from Gabriel. Still on for dinner? A smile tugged at her lips, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a quiet thrill of excitement. She had let Marcus's presence haunt her for too long. But now, as she stared at the message, she realized something. She was finally free. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed a reply. Yes, dinner sounds great. Later that night, Samantha found herself sitting across from Gabriel at a quaint restaurant nestled in the heart of Madrid. The soft glow of candlelight reflected in his eyes. And as they talked, really talked, Samantha felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Gabriel wasn't pushing, wasn't asking for more than she was ready to give. He was just there, present in the moment with her. Halfway through the evening, he leaned in slightly, his voice low. I've been wanting to ask you something for a while, but I didn't want to rush anything. I know what you've been through, but I feel like there's something between us, Sam. Am I wrong? Samantha met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a breath, and for the first time, the words didn't feel terrifying. You're not wrong. Gabriel smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made her feel like everything was going to be okay. Good, he said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Because I'd like to see where this goes. No pressure, just when you're ready. For the first time in years, Samantha felt ready. Not just for Gabriel, but for the future she had been so afraid to embrace. The future that was hers to create, without Marcus, without the shadows of the past. But as her new life unfolded, Samantha knew one thing. Marcus wasn't finished. He wouldn't let go so easily. The next chapter of her story would come with battles she hadn't anticipated. But this time, she wouldn't face them alone. The weeks after Marcus's unexpected visit passed in a blur, but Samantha had no time to dwell on it. Her work at the startup was more demanding than ever as the Madrid project grew in complexity. Late nights at the office became her new normal, and her relationship with Gabriel was evolving in a way that surprised her. She found herself looking forward to their dinners, their long walks through the city, and the steady comfort of his presence. Still, a part of her was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She knew Marcus wouldn't simply fade into the background. He had always been a man who needed control, and Samantha had taken away the one thing he had always counted on, her devotion. She tried not to think about him, but every now and then, his words from that night echoed in her mind. One wrong move, and it'll all fall apart. It was on a Friday afternoon, just as Samantha was wrapping up a meeting, that her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We need to talk." Her heart sank as she stared at the message, dread pooling in her stomach. She ignored it, refusing to let him pull her back into his world. But Marcus was persistent. That evening, as Samantha was sitting in the living room with Gabriel, who had become a comforting presence in her home, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, and Gabriel noticed the tension in her body as she glanced at the phone. "Is everything okay?" Gabriel asked softly, concern etched across his face. Samantha sighed and set the phone down. "It's Marcus. He won't leave me alone." Gabriel frowned. "Do you want to talk about it?" For a moment, she hesitated. Gabriel had always been patient, never pushing her to open up about Marcus or the wounds left behind from her marriage. But now, with Marcus reappearing in her life, Samantha felt like the shadows of her past were creeping back in. "I thought I was done with him," Samantha said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "After the divorce, I moved on. At least I thought I did. But now he's trying to worm his way back into our lives. It's like he can't stand the fact that I'm doing okay without him." Gabriel listened carefully, his hand resting on hers, offering silent support. "He wasn't a bad father before," she continued, "but he's barely been present since the divorce. The kids barely know him anymore, and now he suddenly wants to be involved? It doesn't feel right." Gabriel nodded, his eyes steady and thoughtful. "What do you think he's after?" Samantha shook her head, unsure. "I don't know. Control, maybe? Or maybe he's just angry that I've built a new life." Gabriel's expression hardened. "You don't have to deal with him alone, Sam. I'm here for you, for whatever you need." She smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "Thank you. I appreciate that more than you know." But even with Gabriel's support, Samantha couldn't shake the unease that Marcus's reappearance brought. She knew he was unpredictable, and that he wasn't the type to simply walk away without getting what he wanted. A few days later, Samantha received a letter from a lawyer. Her heart sank as she read the opening line. Marcus Nolan is filing for joint custody of Emma and Jacob. The air felt thick around her as the words blurred in her vision. Joint custody? Marcus had barely seen the children in over a year. Now he wanted to fight for them? She immediately called her lawyer, desperate for advice. "This doesn't make sense," Samantha said, pacing the small office. "He's never been this involved. Why now?" Her lawyer, a calm and seasoned woman named Claudia, sighed. "Samantha, sometimes these cases aren't about the children. They're about control. It's not uncommon for an ex-spouse to use custody as a way to reassert their influence, especially if they feel like they're losing their grip." "Losing his grip," Samantha repeated bitterly. "That's exactly what this is about." "We'll fight it," Claudia assured her. "You've been their primary caretaker since the divorce. We'll show the court that his interest in joint custody is recent and superficial." But the fear gnawed at Samantha. She had worked so hard to build a new life for her children. Moving to Madrid, giving them a fresh start. The thought of Marcus tearing it all apart sent waves of anxiety crashing over her. When she told Gabriel about the custody battle, he was furious. "He's trying to punish you," Gabriel said, pacing the living room. "He knows how much you've worked to give the kids a stable life, and he wants to take that away." Samantha nodded, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on her. "I don't know what to do. I can't let him win. I can't let him drag the kids back into his world." Gabriel stopped pacing and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You're not alone in this, Sam. We'll fight him together. You're stronger than he knows. Stronger than you know." His words settled over her like a warm blanket, soothing the fear that had been building inside. But deep down, Samantha knew the battle ahead would be a difficult one. The first court hearing was scheduled for mid-October. Marcus's legal team came prepared, painting him as a dedicated father who had been kept at a distance by Samantha's move to Madrid. He stood before the judge, his demeanor calm and measured, as he spun a tale of regret and responsibility. Samantha sat there, fuming. This was the same man who had barely picked up the phone to call his children, now claiming he wanted to be more involved in their lives. It felt like a cruel joke. When her turn came to speak, Samantha stood, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. "Your Honor, Marcus wasn't driven out of our children's lives. He left on his own. He's been largely absent since the divorce, and now he's using this custody battle as a way to regain control over me, not the children. Emma and Jacob barely know him anymore. I've built a stable life for them here in Madrid, and I won't let him uproot that." The judge listened carefully, nodding as Samantha spoke, but the tension in the courtroom was palpable. It would be a long process, and Samantha knew that Marcus wouldn't make it easy. As the months wore on, the custody battle dragged them through the mud. Marcus filed motion after motion, making it clear that he wouldn't back down. Samantha did everything she could to protect her children, fighting with every ounce of strength she had left. But the toll it took on her was undeniable. There were days when the stress of it all made her want to crumble, when the weight of Marcus's manipulation felt like too much to bear. But Gabriel was always there, steady and unwavering. He had become her anchor in the storm, holding her together when she felt like she might break apart. One evening, after another long day in court, Samantha sat in the kitchen with Gabriel. The kids were in bed, and the soft hum of the city filtered through the open windows. She leaned her head on his shoulder, exhaustion seeping into her bones. "I'm so tired, Gabriel," she whispered. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." He kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapped around her. "You're doing everything you can, Sam. You're fighting for them, and that's what matters. Don't let Marcus win by breaking you down." Samantha nodded, but a tear slipped down her cheek. "What if I'm not enough? What if the court sides with him?" Gabriel tilted her chin up, his gaze locked on hers. "You are enough. You're more than enough. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together." She stared at him, the sincerity in his eyes almost too much to bear. In that moment, she realized something profound. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She had found someone who wasn't just there for the easy parts of life, but who stood by her through the darkest moments. "I love you, Gabriel," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His eyes softened, and a slow smile spread across his face. "I love you too, Sam." In that moment, Samantha knew that whatever battles lay ahead, whether with Marcus or with her own fears, she wouldn't face them alone. The day of the final custody hearing arrived with an air of tension so thick, Samantha could barely breathe. She had been through months of court battles, legal maneuvers, and emotional exhaustion. Marcus had thrown everything at her, trying to paint her as an unstable mother, uprooting the children's lives for selfish reasons. It had been brutal, but she hadn't given up. Not once. Not when her kids' futures were on the line. Gabriel had been by her side through it all, a constant source of strength, reminding her that no matter the outcome, she had fought with everything she had. But the fear still lingered. What if Marcus won? What if, despite all her efforts, the court decided to give him partial custody and force the children to split their lives between two countries? She couldn't bear the thought. As they entered the courtroom, Marcus was already there, sitting with his high-priced lawyer, his face smug and confident. Samantha took her seat, her lawyer Claudia by her side, and exhaled deeply. Gabriel sat just behind her, a silent, reassuring presence. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Marcus's lawyer was the first to speak, weaving a tale of a devoted father who had been wronged, who had been kept from his children by a vindictive ex-wife. My client has made every effort to be a part of his children's lives, but Samantha Nolan has deliberately created barriers, moving them to a foreign country, denying Marcus the opportunity to be a father. Samantha clenched her fists under the table. The lies felt like physical blows, but she had prepared for this. She knew Marcus would twist the truth to suit his narrative. Then it was her turn. Claudia rose and spoke with conviction. Your Honor, Marcus Nolan has been absent from his children's lives by choice. Since the divorce, he's made minimal effort to engage with them. And now, after more than a year of no substantial contact, he wants to disrupt the stability and happiness that Samantha has built for Emma and Jacob in Madrid. This case is not about what's best for the children. It's about control. Samantha was called to the stand. As she sat there, her heart pounded, but she spoke clearly, her voice steady. Your Honor, I moved to Madrid because it was the best decision for my children. They have thrived here. They're happy, they have friends, a stable school life, and they've built a new home. Marcus, he wasn't interested in being part of their lives until it suited him. This isn't about the children for him. It's about me. He's trying to punish me. She looked over at Marcus, who sat unmoved, his expression cold. The man she had once loved now felt like a stranger, someone whose bitterness had consumed him entirely. The judge took everything into account, the testimonies, the legal arguments, the character assessments. Hours passed, and every minute felt like an eternity to Samantha. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. After careful consideration, it is clear to this court that the best interest of the children is the priority. Emma and Jacob have adjusted well to their new life in Madrid, and uprooting them now would be detrimental. Therefore, full custody will remain with Samantha Nolan, with visitation rights granted to Marcus Nolan under strict guidelines. Relief washed over Samantha like a tidal wave. She had won. Her children would stay with her, and they wouldn't have to be dragged back into Marcus's chaotic world. Marcus's face tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. She could see the fury in his eyes, but it didn't matter. He had lost, and more than that, he had no control over her anymore. As they left the courtroom, he shot her one final look, filled with bitterness and resentment, but she didn't flinch. Outside the courthouse, Gabriel was waiting for her. The moment she saw him, she collapsed into his arms, the tears finally coming, not from sadness, but from sheer exhaustion and relief. You did it, Sam, he whispered, holding her tightly. You fought for them, and you won. She nodded against his chest, the weight of the past months slowly lifting off her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to exhale, to truly feel the victory. The weeks following the court ruling were a blur of adjustments, but they were good changes, ones that signaled a new chapter in her life. The custody battle had taken its toll, but Samantha had emerged stronger, more resilient than she had ever believed she could be. One afternoon, as she and Gabriel sat at the park watching Emma and Jacob play, Gabriel turned to her with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking, he began, his tone casual but with a hint of excitement beneath it. What if we move somewhere new? Together. A fresh start for all of us. Samantha looked at him, surprised. Together? He nodded. Yeah. I love you, Sam, and I love those kids like they're my own. We've talked about it before, but I think now's the right time. We've both been through so much, and I want to build something with you, a real future. Her heart swelled at his words. Gabriel had been everything Marcus wasn't. kind, patient, and supportive. He had never tried to control her, never made her feel small. He had simply loved her as she was and had been there for her and her children in ways she hadn't even realized she needed. "I want that too," she whispered, smiling as she reached for his hand. "I really do." And so, they made plans, not just for a new home, but for a life where the past didn't cast long shadows over the present. Samantha had fought for her children, for herself, and for the right to live on her own terms. Now it was time for the next adventure. They moved to a charming coastal town in southern Spain, where the sea met the sky in shades of blue Samantha had only ever dreamed of. The kids were excited, embracing their new life with the same resilience they had shown in Madrid. And for the first time in years, Samantha felt free, truly free. One morning, as she stood on the balcony of their new home, the gentle breeze from the Mediterranean brushing against her skin, Samantha reflected on how far she had come. From a woman who had sacrificed everything for a man who didn't deserve her, to a mother who fought fiercely for her children, to a partner who had finally found love that was real and true. Marcus, on the other hand, had seen his life unravel. After losing the custody battle, his professional life had begun to deteriorate. His business deals fell through, and Kelly, the woman he had left Samantha for, had moved on, leaving him alone to face the wreckage of his choices. He had nothing left but his bitterness, and Samantha no longer felt anything for him. Not anger, not sadness, just indifference. She had moved on, and now her life was full of love, laughter, and possibility. As Gabriel joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind, Samantha smiled. The road had been long and hard, but it had led her here to a place of peace. She had fought for her happiness, for her children's future, and in the end, she had won. "You're thinking again," Gabriel teased, kissing the top of her head. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," she replied, leaning into him. "We're both lucky," he whispered. And with that, Samantha knew that her story wasn't one of betrayal or defeat. It was a story of resilience, of love, and of finding strength in the most unexpected places. She had rebuilt her life, brick by brick, and in the process, she had found herself again. And this time, no one would ever take that away from her.